I'm Corbett Wall with DV Auction, here with your feeder flash for Monday, March the 25th, and I mentioned it on the weekly. The ice road truckers must have been in the northern plains and backed under some cattle pots to get all the cattle placed that the cattle on feed report showed that were placed in the northern plains, Nebraska, Iowa, places like that up there in the Midwest. But really an eye-opener there, and a bearish tone. It was kind of nice when we didn't have to brace for those cattle on feed reports because they were late behind because of the government shutdown. But now they're back on schedule, and we have to worry about what the board's going to be on Monday, despite all the bullishness from the floods, the death loss, the horrible winter, the hog deal that's give a big shot in the arm to the board here of late. But we're going to have to brace to see what that's going to be. Look at the board for last week. April live cattle futures 129.72, up 62 cents for the week. June was 123.50 on Friday at close. That was up $1.58. March feeder cattle ended the week at 143 even. That was up $1.68. April at 148.80, up 188. And I mentioned the hogs. Look at what the hogs did at the end of the week. Lean hogs for April ended the week at 78.32. That's dressed. That's up $9.52 for the week. Huge charge there. And a lot of your speculators have been buying live cattle futures out front, thinking that that's going to make an impact when we start sending pork over to China, thinking that's going to make an impact down the road on protein. But they're buying contracts late in the year this year and early next year. That's given a charge to your fall feeder cattle, which is giving even a bigger charge to your lighter weight calves and stockers now that are going to go on grass and become fall feeder cattle. But let's look at your fat cattle trade. All the bullishness there and come out, and we had 128 in the southern plains, hoping to get more. I thought we could get 130 somewhere. We did maybe on a deal or two in the northern plains around that flooded area on some confinement cattle that were clean and places that they really needed them. But the southern plains hadn't had a whole lot of problems. You know, early in the winter, western Kansas had their share of problems and a lot of mud and everything, but Texas Panhandle and the Oklahoma Panhandle for the most part has been pretty mild all winter. On the outside of some windstorms and things like that, it hadn't been too bad at all. But 128, that was still a buck better. Nebraska and Colorado, Wyoming areas up there where they have feedlots got mostly $2 more at 129, and the dress market gained quite a bit of ground at 208. And that was $3 to mostly $4 higher than the previous week. So did gain some ground, but that elusive 130 still can't seem to grab that. Box beef cutout values. Your average trade for last week on choice cuts is $228.95. That was up $1.25 compared to the previous week's average. And selects at $218.66. Your average trade for last week, that was down 41 cents compared to the previous week. And those quotes are close to where the market ended on your box beef cutout values. Choice select spread at 10.29 and kind of a light volume movement last week at 478 cuts, grinds, and trimmings. Your slaughter, big last week. That's the biggest we've had. And your packers are really needing to harvest as many as they can to fill all these out front orders that they've made already, plus keep things going. As miserable as this winter has gotten and as nice as the weather has gotten on the outside of the flooded areas, people are going to be getting back out, dusting off those grills and really going after some of this beef. But 631,000 for last week, that's giant. That was 34,000 more than the previous week and 20,000 more than the same week a year ago. I've talked about your death loss up there in Nebraska especially, but going over into Iowa, all in there. It's hard to guesstimate, and we've heard the biggest, wildest guesses from some that are so small that people must not be paying attention to some that are pretty lofty up there, and not sure if we can justify those, but it would be really nice if we had a way whenever we have one of these catastrophes for people to report how many head of cattle that they've lost, because it's really hard to kind of wrap our mind around. You just look at Nebraska. If you thought in the whole state of Nebraska in the calf crop they lost 25%, that wouldn't be the million head that everybody's saying. It'd be less than half of that. But if you look at the total cattle according to inventories, total cattle and calves in Nebraska at 6.8 million. If they lost 15% of those, now a lot of places lost everything they had, or lost half, or something in that area, and there were some places in the corners that didn't lose more than normal. But if you took 15% of that total cattle and calves, that would be over 1 million head. So if you count just what the flood had, plus all the blizzards and the horrible winter and the mud and the snow and the drifts and the whole misery of it, you know, maybe you can justify that, but it would be pretty sizable. This cattle on feed report, very disappointing. Haven't had to dread one of those because they've been so off schedule so far this year, but had one on schedule Friday. It was bearish. Your inventories March 1st in your feedlots, 100.7% of a year ago. Your estimate was at 99.7, so that's on the bearish side. Placements is what is really hard to understand. The average of the analyst guess was for placements to be 4% lower for February than they were the same time a year ago. And most everybody would look at that and think that that would be pretty reasonable, 4% lower. And then your placements come in at 102.2% of a year ago, which is a little bit hard to swallow, especially if you realize that your February reported auction receipts were down 6.2%. And not a lot of direct cattle really moving during them. If you look on the videos, the internet sales, you know, you don't see a whole lot of February deliveries on there. But nevertheless, that's what come out. I worked for USDA long enough to know that it can be official and still not be right. But marketing's come out with actuals at 100.5%. with an estimate at 100.8, and then that's pretty close there, and they usually always nail those because we know exactly how many cattle that they slaughter every day. But you look at those February placements. Nebraska, you would have thought they'd have been down because it's just suffering through that horrible winter. A lot of places, a lot of buyers that I talked to said they didn't even have an order for their Nebraska feedlots because the mud was so miserable. The bitter cold that they had, they just couldn't hardly take any more cattle. But your Nebraska placements for February come in at 3% more than a year ago, just 88% of January's placements. And Iowa come in at 113% of a year ago February placements. Wow. And 120% of the month before, January placements. Hard to really fathom. And you would have thought that a lot of people would have been sending cattle to the Texas Panhandle to put on feed because it's so dry down here and there's kind of a mild winter. And a lot of those big outfits have feedlots in the northern plains and the southern plains. But Texas February placements were only 1% bigger and just 88% of January's placements. But I'm not sure we can just argue about that, but it doesn't really do any good. It could jolt the board a little bit. I still think that your high volume feeder cattle auctions on Monday will be higher because we saw some pretty fancy prices coming through middle of the week and late in the week last week in your feeder cattle auctions. These guys wanting to buy stocker cattle and calves, maybe they didn't have a place to straighten them up, and the nice weather we've had the last 10 days or 2 weeks, with the exception of the flooded areas, has made it where some guys can get in and try to get some calves in just a little bit before they turn them out. But a lot of places turn out April 15th. You look at the Flint Hills, a lot of cattle will be turned out then. They've got enough moisture in there. They've been burning those pastures off, and that is something cool to see, is watching those pastures being burned off in the Flint Hills. Your Indians figured that out long time ago. Whenever they were migrating around chasing the buffalo, when they would have a fire, they noticed that the grass was much better in those areas, and then the buffalo would be right there. So they started burning those off hundreds of years ago, and we're still doing it, and it's really cut out a lot of the useless brush and things in that area. And when you go through there early in the spring after they burn that off, within days that blue stem is coming up, and and within weeks it's lush and beautiful, and you drive through there and it just looks like a park. But that is coming on. Some guys, what they really want is some lightweight cattle, especially some cattle that's got a little bit of age to them, some stocker type cattle, maybe some calf weight yearlings that are ready to just process and turn out. That's what they want. They can't really put cattle into a lot, preconditioned lot, and spend a lot of time messing with them. That's why you saw your southeastern calf markets just mostly steady, even though everybody's really hungry for lightweights. They don't have time to straighten them out anymore. We need something that's ready to go. But you look at your cash feeders for last week. Your real-time index on Cattle Market Central ended the week at 141.60 based on an 800-pound steer. That was $5.47 higher than the end of the previous week. Wow, on a 7-day moving index. That is gigantic. And you look at your cash feeders and your sale barns, $3 to $8 higher, with guys really hungry for them when the weather turned around. We knew that they would. Stocker cattle and calves, $5 to $10 higher in a lot of spots. Look at some individual quotes late in the week. Eastern Missouri Commission Company, Bowling Green, Missouri, had 54 head of steers, 671 in the weight. They were stocker types at 166.75. Erickson, Nebraska, on Saturday, 95 head of fancy 605-pound stocker steers at 195. And let's get outside the region, go way out west to Shasta Livestock Auction Yard, Cottonwood, California. 58 head of 475-pound steer calves at 177. That's your feeder flash for Monday.